Blog Talk Radio.
Greetings and welcome, Big Nation listeners. I want to play a game. Right now you're listening to a radio show. It will infect your brain with original thoughts. The only way to survive is to keep your mind open. Let the game begin. And now, without further ado, the host of Big Nation Radio, Special Ed.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Big Nation Radio. I'm your host, Special Ed, and with me, as always, from Chi-Town, Chicago, the land of the free, the home of the pizza, our very own Blockhead. What's up, brother?
Yo, Special Ed. What's up, dude? How's it going, son?
Oh, man. You know what? I just got confirmation that our guest next week is going to be none other than Neil Strauss, the author of the game. His protege, Evolve, from Style Life, is going to be joining us and hopefully teaching us and talking about truly the mystery method and the Style Life techniques for attracting women and closing women. So make sure you have some excellent questions, because I know you've been studying this stuff. In fact, I know you've been reading the game, so while you're at it, why don't you give me a quick rundown on what you've learned so far?
Well, I'll tell you what, there's so much in that book that I can go on and on forever talking about different techniques that Mystery uses, or Mystery's people uses, even other PUAs, which is pickup artists in the world. But I'll tell you a quick story. I used an opener today while I was at work. This is a good story. I was walking down a hallway at work. I work at a hospital in Chicago. I work in an ER. And this X-ray technician who works across the hall, I've been kind of eyeballing her back and forth for the last few months. And, her and I play that eyeball, hey, what's up game, but we keep walking. So today, I seen her in the cafeteria, and she was on her cell phone text messaging. So I walk up behind her, and I said, hey, are you a text monster like I am? She tells me that she is. I sit down next to her, and I look at her and say, who is your best text message buddy? And she's like, well, I don't know. I think that's my cousin. I said, your cousin's your best text message buddy? She's like, yeah, because she's a text freak like I am. I said, tell you what, text me right now, and I can promise you I will be your best text message buddy. So she laughed, and she's like, oh, really? How do I know that? I said, I'll prove it to you. Text me right now. And I would guarantee you'll never text anybody like the way I text. I said, I'll be your number one text BFF. So I had her laughing, and she did. She said, okay, what's your number? So I told her my number, and she texted me. And I said, okay. And I left. I just walked away. I go downstairs, look at my coat, and she texted me, and her and I have been going back and forth all day. And I think I'm taking her out Saturday night.
Excellent. So make sure you give us a rundown on how it goes. I didn't quite hear. I don't know. I'm not quite sure that would be an opener approved by Mystery and Style themselves.
No, well, what I'm doing is I'm taking like a little bits and pieces from different PUAs in the game, like David D'Angelo, Ross Jeffries. I'm kind of like collaborating my own like little approach. I mean, I have my own style regardless. Like even before I've been reading this book so heavily, but I think it more teaches confidence and really believing in what you're selling, which is yourself. It's about being a salesman. So, I read it and I take some tips and I kind of just apply it for practice, more for entertainment purposes, or more to see if what these people are saying is really true. And for the most part, I really, really believe a lot of it's the truth behind all of it.
Not that it stopped you in the past from pounding veg at the Arnold Classic, but in the past you've been married and going through a rough breakup. Are you prepared to test your skills there? I think that'd be a good testing ground. The
Arnold Classic, I would be most prepared to test the skills I've been learning from Neil Strauss's book, The Game. Absolutely.
Very good, very good. Another guy, I think David Reese, still hasn't called in, but David, if you're listening, the number is 646-595-3895. If you're listening to Big Nation Radio, and the topic for this very second is pickup artistry, but hopefully Mr. Townsend, Mr. James Townsend, Hollywood legend, is going to call in any minute now.
You're listening to KBIG, Big Nation Radio. And now it's time for a Big Nation News update with Blockhead.
Oh, give us some news, man. What's going on? What'd you think of? Were you all Guns N' Roses out after last week?
I was, man. In my car right now, as we speak, I have Use Your Illusion as 1 in my car right now. But yeah, for the last week, I've been thinking about GNR a little bit more often. Digging through my old albums. I even broke out Lies record. When they mentioned the song, Move to the City, Nice Boys Don't Play Rock and Roll, even Patience, as most people know. But yeah, I've been really into it. I've always been into GNR, obviously, but ever since talking to Mark, I really been thinking about them a little bit more often.
Well, just a minute ago we were talking about our next guest, and I think he's with us right now. He is I refer to him as legendary. That might be overstating the case, but I don't think so. He's a legendary producer, screenwriter, and he's also an Englishman. He's a fellow Englishman. Sir James Townsend has written or produced several films, such as Wonderland, Undisputed II, which we all know is one of the greatest MMA movies of all time, Belly of the Beast, and Out of Reach, and many, many others that he's taken his name off because as if you couldn't be embarrassed to write a Steven Seagal movie, he's actually written other movies that are somehow lower on the totem pole. Is that right? Is that fair to say, James?
Good evening, Jason. Good evening to all your listeners. I mean, on the scale of what you put your name on and what you don't put your name on as a screenwriter, there are definitely some that are pretty close to the bottom of the ladder, so you could dodge them with your real credentials. That's true.
Well, James, I was in L.A. and I went to a party at Sean Young's house, and Sean Young probably hasn't seen an A movie in, about 10 years. So if you wrote, let's say, a Sean Young, James Woods reunion movie that went straight to video, would you put your name on that?
I don't know. My opinion has changed. Recently, I've been coming around to actually thinking about putting my name on everything and being done with this kind of being ashamed of things. But right now or a little while ago, I probably, you know what? I take it back. For James Woods, I don't care what he's in. I'll put my name on it just for everything else he's been in. So in that,
I was looking at Steven Seagal's bio today. He's actually done 5 movies already in 2008, and he did 5 movies in 2007. He's totally become a straight-to-video guy. I guess his movies just have no chance of coming out at the theater. Why is that?
Well, what you have is this kind of, I like to refer to it as a mechanized system of squeezing every last drop of money out of him that they can. He's surrounded by lots of people that work for him and that don't work for him that are just basically trying to squeeze him for every last dollar before he hits like 350 pounds. Yeah, because the truth is it's a very and he's actually these days not really. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of his finances exactly, and I haven't worked with him for a number of years, but he spends a lot of money to maintain a certain lifestyle, which is probably a little above where he's at career-wise. So when they come to him with these kind of strange, creatively financed package deals of foreign pre-sales, etc., Israeli gun runners and that kind of stuff, and they say, hey, listen, here's $6 million, you're going to do 3 movies for us. Of course the guy's going to say yes, because there's no one else at his door with $6 million.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. I was curious if you had any idea what Steven Seagal's quote was. I figured they were making these movies for maybe $3 to $5 million, and like you said, they've already pre-sold them, so they know they're going to make some money off it. But are they really paying him $2 million a picture still?
I would guess right now. I mean, back. I mean, when I made a couple of movies with him, and this was in 2002. And you have to remember that he was kind of, for a post-famous Seagal, he was kind of on a bit of a career pop because of, was it Exit Wounds? What was that one he did with, do you remember that one with the hip-hop guy and everything?
Yeah,
Exit Wounds. Like, that did pretty well. And he was kind of on a little bit of a pop for him, you know what I mean? And he hadn't fully been, like, squeezed by them. And I think back then he was making 3 to 4 on a movie, but it's definitely below that now. I would imagine it's 1 to 2 right now. But you've got to understand, Jade, like, this guy, even in today's market, I mean, we're talking about him. He's a a crazy, ridiculous human being. But there is a mathematical equation where there are certain people who will rent his movie all over the world. So there is, you can get together, X amount of cash to make the movie. I think these days, I would guess they're making the movies for about, like, below the line, probably about 3, and they're paying him 1 to 2, and all in the movie's probably $6 million, and they're pre-selling it for at least that before they go make it. So it's just a nice little kind of earner for everyone involved. He doesn't care because he doesn't care about the movies he's in these days, and it's good for all involved. I think I'm not involved, and maybe we'll get to that later as to the specific point where I broke away from the Seagal entourage. But
James, what was Steven Seagal's highest grossing movie? Like, what was the pinnacle of all that Steven Seagal? Was it Under Siege?
I don't know. I can tell you from my point of view, and I don't know whether I wasn't a massive Seagal fan when he first, I guess I wasn't a huge movie fan when I was a kid, which I guess would have, like, I'm 33 years old, right? So when kind of Above the Law and all that stuff was out, which was like 89, 90, like, I really wasn't watching films. The first, apart from, I'm from England, so all we watched was James Bond reruns, Zulu, and other Michael Caine movies, so that's kind of all we got. I think he first came on my horizon for Under Siege, and I still maintain that Under Siege is the best movie he ever made. And that's not because of him. That's mainly because his entire role was based on keeping his mouth shut and hiding. and Tommy Lee Jones carried the movie. He still maintains, even when I was hanging out with him, that he taught Tommy Lee Jones everything he knows about acting, which is awesome.
Oh, we can't forget Gary Busey.
Well, there's another fine actor who learned everything he knows from Seagal. Gary Busey and Seagal share a lot. I don't know Gary Busey. I've never met him, and I don't really know anyone that has, but they would never mix. I don't think you could ever get them together because Seagal would probably look at Gary Busey and just think about ways to kind of destroy him as a human being. But they're actually a lot closer to each other than they would ever admit.
I gotta tell you, the best thing about Steven Seagal movies are his character names. His character names in movies are like a cross between like superhero characters and porn stars. You got Casey Ryback or Mason Storm,
Oh, we had so much fun. This is the crazy thing. I'm trying to think of what we called it. What his name? It was like Jack Hopper, I think. It was
I'm looking at it. Belly of the Beast, he's Jake Hopper, and Out of Reach, he's William Lansing. Yeah, but I'll give you. They tend to like the names John and Jack and Jake a lot when they talk about Steven Seagal. He's been Jack Cole, Jack Taggart, Jonathan Cole, Jake Hopper, Jack Miller, John Seeger, Jack Foster, John Sands, John Colt, and in the Onion movie, he's Cockpuncher.
Which I think is actually his finest role. Someone showed that to me recently, and I laughed so hard I can't even tell you. But yeah, I gotta tell you, and I gotta tell all your listeners that, like, whatever you think of the guy, he's an amazing human being. He's an amazing specimen of a human being. The fact that human beings like this exist are the reason we're all still interested in each other as human beings. He's awful. He's a nightmare. He can't act himself out of a brown paper bag, but he's interesting. He's really interesting.
Well, we'll get to that in just a minute. But James, tell our listeners how you come here from England. I think you're born and raised in London, right?
I was born in London. I was raised on the south coast in Sussex, with a fair amount of other stuff as well. But yeah,
right. So you come here. you start working in advertising, how do you wind up jumping on the Hollywood train? A lot of people make it sound like it's the most impossible thing in the world, but you kind of made it seem easy.
Well, my story is the ultimate truth that everyone knows, and that's if you don't try and do things, things happen to you. I had a couple of very close friends who went to film school ever since they were 12. They've been making these little movies about, I don't know, their dead cat or like their first masturbation session. I don't know what film school kids make movies about, but like that's probably the kind of stuff they were into. Like I said to you, I was never into film. I didn't know. I was always very into reading books, and like up until 20, I probably only saw, like I said, James Bond movies and Michael Caine movies. I think I saw E.T. and Ghostbusters, and Back to the Future might have been big ones, but I wasn't. It just wasn't on my arena. I happened to come here after college and started working for an ad agency. Happened to be friends with these kids that were in advertising. That were in the film business, and they basically approached me one day and were like, "Listen, you're a crazy guy. You're our friend. Forget all this advertising malarkey. Forget corporate America. Come to Los Angeles with us, and we'll go make movies." I was very resistant. In no way would I believe that it could ever become a reality. But they worked me down for a few years, and finally, when we were about 25 or 26 years old, they got me to a point where I agreed to go with them, because we had the screenplay that ultimately became the movie Wonderland. I wasn't a writer on that, but I was a producer on it, and so we had a thing. They had a certain amount of kudos, and I kind of like jumped on the train after some persuasion and went with them. When we got to LA, we as these things, especially after 9/11, as things happened, the whole movie got delayed, and we didn't really have a chance to make it, and we were completely broke and needed some money. I'd by myself been working on some action ideas just because I kind of liked action movies. My background in terms of interest wasn't really, like I said, it wasn't really movies. It was more like when I was a kid, I engrossed myself in kind of swashbuckling, like colonial British novels. You know what I mean? As any young man in a failed empire, could appreciate, kind of like reading about the swashbuckling pursuits of his forefathers was always interesting. So I was always kind of into action, and I'd come up with a few ideas, and we were broke, and the director of Wonderland, James Cox, he had quite a powerful agent at William Morris, so we kind of went to him and we were like, "Listen, bro, we're completely broke." And he's like, "Well, we're going to put this movie together soon." And we were like, no, we're broke. We can't afford our rent. And he was like, "Hold on." And it just so happened that day, a Steven Seagal movie that was kind of in the pipe and ready to go had lost its screenplay. And kind of on, regarding what I was saying earlier about the fact that it's something of a machine, and it's not necessarily the most the most in-depth creative process making movies with him. They were like, can you put something together in 2 or 3 weeks? So completely without any planning, myself was like, hey, I'm going to kind of put together some action ideas. Was suddenly in the back of a 1982 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme with the roof cut off, winding my way towards Mandeville Canyon and the bosom of the Seagal empire. And that was kind of it. That was the trajectory.
Did you run to the bookstore and buy all the Sid Field books? What did you do?
No. Luckily, I had the two guys who not that they knew what they were doing at the time, but they knew more than I was, than I knew at the time. You need to understand, Jay, like this, putting together a movie like this isn't necessarily about understanding the kind of like the 3-act, 20-beat structure. It's more about being able to put up with the onslaught of kind of craziness and being able to live in that world and being able to kind of say the right things to make the right people happy, and at the end of it, sit down and put down 5 to 10 pages of relatively coherent, interesting stuff with all of the various crazy shit that's floating around. So it's more of I wouldn't say writing those kind of movies is an exercise in pure screenwriting, because if you try to do that, and I did a couple of times, you're just setting yourself up for complete disappointment and failure, because someone else is going to ruin it.
So you wrote You wrote like a 5-10 page treatment, and then you schlepped off to the town.
Exactly. I went up there with a director and with another writer, a very close friend of mine, Captain Mausner, and kind of co-worker, and also the director, James Cox. We all trooped up there. We kind of had a loose idea. The agents had kind of prepped us as like, listen, he likes Asia. as you know, I think that's one of the few places where they still think he's famous. You know, so they prepped us with he likes Asia. My idea was, and I hate to get too serious, but I was very into, like, post 9/11. I was very into, like, putting together a story about this heist in the Balkans, and it was going to be this heist because in Kosovo there were actually some quite high-end metallic mines like platinum and stuff. So it's going to be this heist movie where this group of UN soldiers pull this huge heist on this platinum mine. The Treblinka mines is what it was called, and they were going to blame it on these kind of like Albanian Muslims, and basically use kind of 9/11 as an excuse as to why everyone should go after them and kind of label them as like these thieves and these terrorists, while these English soldiers were kind of sneaking out with all of this Treblinka platinum. So that was my kind of like Italian job idea I had. So we kind of took a version of that to him that had been transplanted to Asia. He immediately was like, it has to be about a girl, which I was like, okay, you mean like every other bad movie you've made over the last 10 years?
Wait. James, let me just cut you off for a second. Let's just go back in time and real slowly, you pulling up to the Seagal compound. Is it in Beverly Hills?
Let me. I don't know who knows LA, but it's squeezed kind of between Beverly Hills and the Pacific Palisades. It's called Mandeville Canyon, and it's one of those long kind of winding, seems pretty rural because it's LA, and even though you're in the city, you're definitely surrounded by countryside, very dry, acacia trees, whatever. And there are driveways going left and right, but they're not the kind of manicured 90210 driveways. They're kind of a little bit rambling, and it's still very expensive, but it's a bit more kind of Hollywood Hills, Laurel Canyon-y. It's not manicured Beverly Hills. It's kind of like in the wilds of Mulholland type stuff, Right. So we make a right. We come down a driveway and we come up towards the house. The first thing I noticed, and I don't know the proper name for them. Some of your listeners may know, but I mean they're some kind of Asian, maybe Japanese. There were those long kind of banner flags. Can you picture what I'm talking about, Jay? They were kind of. And they had Chinese characters on them, and obviously that could be Japanese, but they were these long kind of procession of flags. And then in front of us where we parked, there were a number of very small, cheap Japanese cars with free Tibet stickers on the back. And obviously later that kind of made sense because he's really into the Dalai Lama and he's really into Tibet and all that stuff, and he actually has a kind of a congregation of these like Tibetan monks that live with him at his house because he kind of like, I think he brings them over and he just like supports them because he's, because of his connection to that cause. And also the fact that I think the Dalai Lama has declared him the reincarnation of a 5th century Buddhist saint. so there's a whole Buddhist connection. So it has that kind of like that wind chimey bell type thing to it before you even penetrate the compound. There's the flags and the kind of the bells and all that stuff, It's very interesting. The first time we ever went there, I was walking up to the front door and there was a large white, I think it was like an Escalade. It was like a big SUV. And getting into it were 2 children and there was a woman in sunglasses leaving. Since then, I've realized that must have been Kelly LeBrock with the 2 children he has with him.
Nice.
He has certain visitation rights. So they were kind of leaving. We were ushered by a black woman, and she wasn't an African American. She was actually an African. She was definitely African by accent and the way she looked. She kind of ushered us out to the back by the pool to this big kind of table, and said, Stephen will be with you in a moment. What can I get you? So we whatever waters, blah blah blah. And then he came out after about a couple of minutes. He came out and he was resplendent in a very kind of technicolored Tibetan jacket with a kind of, I don't know whether it was rabbit fur or it may be Mongolian actually. It was like one of those kind of very kind of elaborate kind of gowns. And he came out and he sat down and we kind of got right down to it. He pretty rapidly was like, Jay, am I allowed to swear on this show, or is this a non-swearing show?
No, it's a total swearing show.
Okay. He would very upfront right from the beginning would pretty much kind of lean back and look at him and be like, "Hey guys, I don't know who the fuck you are, but if the Jews have sent you up here, then you must have something going for you," because he sees the world very much in terms of the kind of he's that wacky. You know what I mean? He's like, you know, and he has. You know, I'm not saying he's a crazy anti-Semite. He has loads of Jewish people working for him, but he sees it as like they're orchestrating this kind of ballet that he performs in. So, and then we kind of hashed it out for a couple of hours with him, and the first. I mean, do you want me to keep going into this, Jay? This first meeting was amazing.
Yeah, that's what I want. That's what we want to hear. Seagal stories.
Okay, just keep going.
James, feel free to throw some Kelly LeBrock stories if you have any.
No, that was it. That was the only time I ever saw her. The first time, it was very much, and this is the great thing about him. I sat there for 2 hours, and I listened to stories about he basically insinuated that he'd been undercover for the CIA in Asia, and he would tell us these stories. And when we were talking about characters in the movie idea, he would say, you need to understand. When I was over there, and like no one would say, "Hey, Stephen, what's over there?" He would just say, "When I was over there." So obviously, we've all seen Vietnam movies. We presume he's talking Southeast Asia, 1968 through 1975, or something like that, right? And he's like, the indige really loved me. Okay, so I'm like, the indige, and he's like, by indige I mean the indigenous population, and we're like, okay, and he's like, take your character, JJ or whatever, and he'd be like, pull out a character, even though we didn't have a story. He'd be like, now, if this guy wanted to send a message to me secretly through the jungle, what he would do is he would shave his head, and he would have the message tattooed in invisible ink on his scalp. Then he would let his hair grow back. And at this point, we're all thinking, okay, so this is this is a pretty elaborate way to send the message. And then he was like, and then he would troop through the jungle for months. And then when he got to me, he wouldn't say anything. He would just shave his head, and he would pour lemon juice on his scalp, and the message would unveil itself. And so, right there, we're like, okay, like we are on fucking like Cloud Sector 9, like Rocket Man, set the fucking controls, and we're just going. Like, this is crazy. This guy.
Is there a sense that if you laugh during any of this, you'll be asked to leave?
Very much so. Very much so. And you do, and it took me towards the end of this interview conversation, we'll talk about the end of my relationship with him. But the moment you start to bring any degree of reality into the situation, it gets a little uncomfortable.
I take it then that me and J. Ralph in that meeting giggling would not be a good sign.
No, giggling. No, you have to play the game. It's like, and I'm not passing judgment. Like, this is the way this guy wants to run his life. Like, everyone around him is very much like very deferent and very full of respect and very kind of, they're like, yes, sir, or yes, Stephen, what can I get you? And his ego is just crazy.
Is it like the emperor has no clothes?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, thank God he has got clothes on, but like, but yeah, it's like, it's just out of control. And as with anyone who actually, I do believe at his core there is, he's a very interesting and very kind of, he's very funny. Like he abuses the people around him in the most amusing way. And as long as you're not one of the minions, which I never kind of became. I just got to witness him kind of abusing his minions. Like he's hilarious, and they all take it, and and it's not mean because they're getting paid and they can walk away whenever they like. But he's one of those people where the ego overtook the personality got him there. The ego overtook the personality, and unfortunately, kind of like ate everything away.
All right, so go on with the story.
Is this how it's going to go, Jay? You're just going to tell me to keep going? I'm just going to tell the story of my life for the last 4 years?
No, you have to tell the story of your life. So tell me a particular time. I just remember a couple tidbit stories, but tell me the time when Steven Seagal told you he was a genius.
Oh, no, I'm not. No, we're not getting to that yet, because that's the end of the story. I have to. I mean, sorry. So let me just. I'll preface it with. I mean, he would all the way through the process. He would say, I'm pretty good, right, guys? I'm pretty smart, right? And obviously, you're like, yeah, totally. Yeah, you've got University of London, 2 NYU and Berkeley kids around, and we're like, oh yeah, Stephen, you're awesome. Just thinking about that check that's going to land. So that whole belly, so we got to this thing. Obviously, there were a number of meetings at his house, loosely veiled as script meetings. So, a couple of tidbits of great things that happened is he's obviously, a pretty big man these days in terms of his weight, and any producer who hires him to do a movie is kind of obsessed with him losing weight, because they do have a number of body doubles for him, right? But they still, for those kind of close-ups and for those kind of hand fighting moments, they want him to be as controlled as possible. But he just refuses to, control his weight. He doesn't drink. He doesn't do drugs. Eating is definitely his thing.
James, for people that are wondering, it's your first script that you wrote. What kind of money are we talking about, and how do you get paid? You get paid like one check when you start writing, one check after the 5th meeting, one check when you start filming.
You get it's broken out based on how many drafts you're going to do, and then the final lump comes like on the first principal day of photography. I actually split. I went into this with James Cox and Captain Mauser, and they kind of, it was specifically James Cox's kind of movie business contacts that got us this job. So even though Mauser and I, and then ultimately I took on the actual work as it kind of moved into production and everything, we split the money. So it wasn't I don't know. God, do I tell you how much money, Jay? Is that me being conservative in English that I don't tell people about money?
No. Well, I mean, just a general idea. I mean, we're talking like 50,000, 25,000 around there.
General idea for Seagal movies at that time, you would get paid between kind of 80 and 150, depending on what it was. Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah. So but then you get rid of 20% of that for agents and other people and managers and all that stuff. So it's not crazy. Hey, we've arrived them in the movie business, but it's great to make any money writing anything these days. As anyone who writes will tell you, like that's a pretty sweet paycheck, and to get that kind of money to kind of hang out and experience all this fun, crazy stuff. So there were a number of meetings at his house. So we progressed into a couple of drafts of the screenplay.
Let me ask you this: all the times that you're at Steven's house or you're meeting with Steven, does he ever take the opportunity to demonstrate some martial arts moves or show you how a scene in the movie should take place? He would never demonstrate. I mean, you need to understand, he was like 325 pounds, Jay. He's like a big dude, you know what I mean? And he's like a big, heavy-set human being. So he would never do martial arts moves. He would definitely kind of like insinuate to you that he could kind of break you. You know what I mean? He would definitely look at you with those eyes and kind of like do things with his hands sometimes, kind of alluding to the fact that like during this scene or during this sequence he could really like lay down some fucking kick-ass, you know what I mean? But there was no actual stuff. It was interesting. The whole time before I actually got on the plane with him to go to Thailand, there was never any of the kind of the physical kind of, there was never any kind of ominous violence type stuff. Like I think he has a lot of weapons at his house. I think he has, you need to understand at this time he was also involved in that Julius Narcius or whatever his name is, that whole FBI tri-state case against him. So he was he's paranoid anyway. Like he's so delusional. He thinks that like, he thinks there are people watching him. He thinks there are people following him and trying to kill him. So he's did he ever check you for bugs?
He never did. No, he never did. Which is interesting. Yeah, it's the kind of thing where if it had said to me, turn out your pockets, I'm going to run you through a metal detector, I wouldn't have thought it was weird at all. I would have been like, no problem, Stephen, you know? I would have been absolutely no problem. So at his house, like, there were family members drifting around. There was, like, he was married to, I think, a German, I don't know if he was married to her, but he had a German wife or girlfriend, live-in partner at the time. There was a daughter around, and, you know, my favorite moment with the daughter in one of the meetings we went up there is you know, she came to the table and she was young, she was like 10 or something like that, and he was on a very strict order from the producer that he wasn't allowed to eat like fattening foods, you know, because we were supposed to be leaving soon, and he was supposed to slim down. And so one of the maids or one of the domestic staff bought like a big tray of cookies. No, sorry. Let me start again. The daughter was sitting next to him, and he said to the domestic staff, like, "Oh, I can't remember her name. We'll call her Nicole. Bring Nicole cookies. She's hungry." You know, so we're sitting there, whatever, and so we're having our meeting, and the domestic, you know, brings a tray of cookies, and as we're talking, he doesn't break eye contact with us, but I see his kind of big pudgy paw kind of leave underneath the table and head towards the girl's plate of cookies. And without saying anything, and without breaking speech, he's talking to us. And he takes a cookie and he just puts it in his mouth and eats it. And the girl, at this point, doesn't touch any of her cookies. And he proceeds through the next half an hour to eat, you know, like 8 chocolate chip cookies from a plate. And she just sits there not doing anything. And I remember just looking at this girl being like, yeah, she's old enough. She must know what's going on right now. She must know her father has ordered her a plate of cookies so he can eat them herself. And what does that do to a human being? You know? So there's that stuff.
It sounds like what I do when I go out with my son.
Yeah, exactly. In his house is awesome. You know, like he has loads of cool stuff because he has had a really interesting life. So people give him cool shit. He has like these amazing kind of Mexican like embroidered saddles. A big thing about him, and that you also need to remember, is he has this crazy, and I'm going to do my best to explain it, but all I can say is like he really considers himself a blues man, right? You know about the music thing and everything. You know, he's like a deputy marshal in Louisiana. There's a reality TV show coming out about him soon. He's friends with B.B. King, and he actually is friends with B.B. King, even though we all think it's bullshit. He actually is. And the craziest thing is he throws all this bullshit at you, and you think it's bullshit, and then he gets out like the number 6006 Stratocaster and plays the blues like he really plays the blues. And I'm not, you know, I think the guy's a fucking crazy man joker, but I'm telling you, he plays the blues like a blues man. No pick, just like with his thumb and with his finger, and he's like a really talented guitar player. And when you question him on it, he comes up with a million stories because, you know, he's got all these different stories about his background. One of them is that his parents were diplomats and they got murdered, so he had to get raised by his like godparents in Louisiana. The other one is that he was growing up in Michigan and he fell on hard times, so he had to live in a very black neighborhood. So he was taken in by the black community in Michigan in the 60s, and he has all these kind of stories. His whole background, he centers his background around kind of African American culture. It's really interesting, and you see it when it comes out. When he hangs out with a black guy in America, he kind of affects a kind of a black sense. It's really interesting, you know. And it's a kind of, say again.
Did you say black scent?
Yeah, he affects it. It's amazing. He calls, you know, he's very much like my brother. Yes, my brother, and he does it. You know, he's very. And it's interesting. It's an interesting part of him. And the truth is, it's like he's kind of, in a way, I often felt that was like his most honest moment. And I don't know the story of his background. Like I've since that time, I've spoken to someone who, on quite good authority, told me he grew up in like, you know, Buena Vista, Southern California. Like I have no idea where he actually grew up, or what he actually, you know. It was like, who was it? It was a guy I know who's a really awesome guy. His name's Sam Bottoms, and he was an actor. He's actually, you know, he was the surfer in Apocalypse Now, right? And he's older now. He's in his 50s. He's a great guy. He knows like Jackson. This is so random. He knows Jackson Pollock, right? No. Sorry. What does he know? What's the singer called, Jay? What's that singer called? Jackson Brown. Okay, so he knows Jackson Browne, and he told me, and this is completely unsolicited, he told me that Jackson Browne told him that Steven Seagal went to high school with Jackson Browne and his best friend in, like, Southern California. This is how crazy the stories are. Like, I have no idea where he comes from. So there's the whole African American thing he's super attached to. So that's a big part of his house. He has lots of amps. He always has like random musicians coming over and trying to sell him like this crazy PV amp from 1971 with original tube or whatever those people get all excited about. I don't think I ever went back to his house after like the whole house thing happened to start with. I went there a number of times for the first few months. I met him. We met him like on a rooftop somewhere once, and then it all kind of went dead, And it was like, we kind of been paid our money. We went off and we made the film Wonderland, and it was all kind of everyone's forgotten about Seagal. And then it was like January of 2003, and we were editing Wonderland, and we suddenly got a phone call, and it was like, who can get on a plane in 15 hours? And we were like, okay. Obviously, like, one of us, so when I say us, I mean myself, Captain Mausner, James Cox, the people, the guys I work with. And, James Cox was the director of Wonderland. He had to edit it. Captain Mausner, like, had some passport emergency. He had, like, he couldn't go with me because he had, like, I think it was, like, I don't know, he looked too crazy in his passport or something, so it was broken or something. So I had to, turn to my girlfriend at the time, my live-in, who became my wife, and say, baby, I'm sorry, but I've got to get on a Gulfstream G5 with Steven Seagal in 12 hours' time, and I may not be back for 4 months. It was and she's obviously a real brick and a real trooper for not leaving me at that point.
What was the situation that you had to get on the plane and fly under those circumstances?
It was without us knowing, the kind of the machine had kind of warmed up again, and they were kind of like, okay, we're going to do it in Thailand because there's some good tax breaks there, and it was cheap, and it's going to be a UK, Hong Kong, Canadian co-production, and we're going to start in a month. So that means that we've got to get the director and the writer and a bunch of other key people out there to like start scouting locations and adapting the movie so it actually fits Thailand properly. So that was it. They were like, listen, Steven, this is Belly of the Beast, and it was like, listen, Steven wants you to get on that plane and wants you to go with him. So I kind of did whatever I needed to do for 12 hours, and then got a taxi out to Van Nuys Airport, and this is so surreal. Like, it's the craziest. This is one of the craziest phases of my life so far. I'm like walking out onto the tarmac onto this kind of pristine G5 or whatever it was, like this jet, and it's like I'm completely by myself, and I walk onto the plane, and there's kind of Seagal lounging on this couch that he's obviously claimed for himself. There were three very kind of rough-looking, and I can only as a European, I can only tell you they were very rough-looking Eastern Europeans, and I could tell that straight away. I don't know whether some kind of like, I couldn't figure it out, but I was like, okay, these guys definitely aren't, Spanish. These guys are like Russian or something like that.
You like Russian mobster-looking guys?
Yeah, they were kind of very wiry, very kind of, without blowing my own trumpet, I've been around enough to look at a human being and know when they were extremely kind of tough and kind of war-torn human being. You know what I mean? They weren't that big. They just looked like regular guys, but they kind of had that weight of kind of violence and hardcore shit written all over their face. There was three of those guys. There were two Chinese businessmen, and there was one assistant, and then there was kind of like the staff on the plane. So whatever, there was probably like 7 or 8 of us. Like a G5 can't make it from Van Nuys in California to Bangkok, so the route is that you go from LA up to Alaska, you refuel, then you go Alaska to Sapporo, you refuel, then you go Sapporo to Tokyo, and then you refuel and you go Tokyo to Bangkok. You know, my kind of trip with him was very much like that first leg from LA to Alaska was very much based on him saying, listen, don't worry about the screenplay, we're going to work on it together, you know, everything's going to be fine, I've done this so many times, there's nothing to worry about. He was kind of assuming quite a paternal role, and I was just kind of getting stuck into the free drink and sandwiches like any good Englishman, and kind of making friends with these guys who turned out to be Bulgarian, right? So I was very close on the mark, you know, and this was the first time this kind of, say again?
How nervous were you? Did you feel like you were in over your head when you got on that plane?
Absolutely not. It was the best. It was amazing. I loved every minute of it. It was like, you know, when you sit around and you talk with your friends about the craziest shit that's going to happen, I was like, this is it. I can't wait to tell everyone about this. This is the best thing. Like when the Bulgarians pulled out, like, you know, like their handguns and stuff, and started kind of like spit polishing their kind of nickel-clad 38. So I was just like, this is fucking awesome. This is the best, you know. And it's like you couldn't write any better. Like I remember one of them had a big tattoo on his arm. It was like a guy's face. It was a very bad tattoo, and his name was Nicky, and he was a lovely guy. You know, for a Bulgarian Serbian massacre man, he had a big thing, and I was like, Nicky, who is that? He's like, he's my brother, and I was like, oh really? What happened? Well, you have a big tattoo? He's like, my brother is dead. They killed him. You know, it's like that kind of shit. It's like it's like Tropic Thunder. It's like all the stuff that you want to put in the Cheesy Seagal movie is actually happening all the time. You know, so that was the kind of like, that was the first thing. There were the Chinese guys who were basically trying to extort money out of Seagal by telling him that he was going to play Genghis Khan in the epic they were putting together, and all he needed to do was give them a check for $40,000 to kind of seed the project. So they were basically trying to extort him. There were the Bulgarian, you know, kind of ex-mobsters, you know, cleaning their guns and just, you know, being actually very nice guys. And the first leg kind of took us to Alaska. And you're going to love this. I don't ever drop this on you. But when we landed in Alaska, and the kind of like the door opened and the gangway was pulled up, we walked down, and it was freezing cold. And it was dawn, and he had again one of his big Mongolian jackets on. And the moment we hit the bottom of the stairs, he looked at me, and I looked at him, and this is the God's honest truth. I said, Stephen, are we on deadly ground? You know, because the movie he did in Alaska, that super cheesy thing with like the whole pitch of like the environmentalist stuff at the end.
Hey, and he directed that movie.
He directed it, and it was like it was the beginning of the end for his career. It was like Michael Caine was like the oil baron, and he gives like a 15-minute like monologue at the end of the movie about like how to save the Indian, and all the Indians are there, the Native Americans are clapping and everything. It's like the most ridiculous movie of all time. And I said to him, Stephen, are we on deadly ground right now? And he looked at me, and he just kind of had this look in his eyes, like this guy, like we've only just begun, and this guy's taking a piss at me right now, you know. And he said something like that, and just walked away. It was so classic. So you know, the journey continued. We got to Tokyo, and I don't know if you know, but he's quite a big deal in Japan. Are you aware of that?
He's a big what?
He's a big deal in Japan.
Yeah, well, he spent a lot of time in Japan when he was younger. I think he opened a dojo there when he was 8.
You are absolutely. I think he ate a dojo when he was 8. No, no, I don't know the exact dates, but I can testify it is the truth. I don't know how he ended up there, but he lived in Japan for a long time. He speaks Japanese kind of fluently. He was married to a Japanese woman whose father owned a dojo, so he actually ended up inheriting a dojo and being an Aikido master, the first ever non-Japanese guy to like run and operate a dojo in Tokyo. And he actually has 2 kids with the woman, who are kind of quasi-TV celebrities in Japan. So he's very dialed in Japan. I think he completely like ditched them all to come to the States and get famous in the mid-80s, which was lovely of him. But he's totally dialed in there. So there was a few days there of kind of businessmen presenting plans to him and movie ideas, and I was kind of under the auspices of rewriting the script, so I was just kind of hidden up in my hotel room and going to 7-Eleven sometimes to get like fish balls and stuff. And then it was on to Bangkok, where we made the movie.
Did Steven ever talk to you, or did you ever ask him about the stories about how he originally impressed Mike Ovitz in a judo class or an aikido class and things like that?
He didn't, but at one point during the movie, when I was so kind of thinking, oh my God, this guy's a scumbag. How did he ever do anything in life apart from just be a scumbag? I went to this guy who works for him, a really nice guy, who's like the associate producer, kind of glorified assistant type guy. And I said to him, I was like, Ben, because we were friends, I was like, Ben, has he, and in a moment of honesty, I was like, has this guy always been like this? Has he always been a nightmare? And Ben said to me, no, he hasn't. The ego, he didn't say this because he's too kind of loyal, but he was, what he said to me was that the ego has taken over. And then he went on to explain to me how he, as in Ben, the assistant, had actually been a student of Steven's in 1984 or 85 when Steven had a dojo on La Cienega in Los Angeles. Because Steven, when he first came, this was pre-Ovitz, right? He had a dojo on La Cienega. People would travel, and this is the true inspiration and the fact that he is a very effervescent and engaging and amazing human being. Obviously, that's kind of dead now, but that did exist. People would drive for hours and hours just to come to his classes. And he would really, he would treat them like a family. If they couldn't afford to eat, he would get food. He would let them sleep in the dojo if it got too late. He really kind of took on this. And you can see it's still present in him. It's just kind of gone a bit wrong. But back then, he really did kind of take this to heart. And I think Ovitz found out about this, and Ovitz invited him to his house for private sessions. So he started training Ovitz privately, but Ovitz was aware of his kind of cult, so he was really into him. And that led to this kind of famous moment at Universal where Ovitz kind of, accumulated, or I can't remember which studio, he accumulated all the executives and the agents, and he kind of imported 20 Japanese guys, and basically Steven Seagal beat them up in front of all of the studio execs and the agents, and then he met them all, and this was 88 or whatever, and Seagal was still a very handsome, charming 30-something-year-old, and that was what led to whatever the first movie was, Beyond the Law, or whatever it was, that Steven basically was the star. He was a producer, and it did $70 million its first week, or some huge total for that kind of time, and it kind of projected him to superstardom. So he never talked about it. No, he doesn't. He was always so wild and so crazy. He didn't really discuss reality. But I got it from the people that surrounded him.
On the set in Thailand, any particular memorable events happen there?
So many funny things. The best thing, there was the great stuff. When we were putting together the movie, he was so delirious and so delusional that he would say things. Because the production company basically have to let him believe that he's in charge of hiring certain key members of the staff. So we'd be looking for a cinematographer. We'd be looking for an actor, and he'd be like, somebody get me Chow Yun-fat on the phone, or Jackie Chan, and you're like, dude, these people aren't doing your movie, So there's a whole game where he's pretending he's gonna hire people, but obviously the production company are pragmatic. They need to make a movie, so they go off and just hire whoever they like. So I never forget this day. We were all in the room, and the producer, who was a great guy, he'd hired this costume designer who was from Canada, because it was Canadian co-production, and she'd come at the last minute, this was a big deal because, she didn't really want to do a Seagal movie, but she was doing it as a favor, and she'd flown, whatever it is from Vancouver to Thailand, 18 hours, she was tired, she'd had a nightmare flight, and we were all in the suite, in Seagal's suite, Seagal, myself, the producer, all of his minions and his assistants, and a couple of other movie people, and she walks in, and the producer says, Steven, I want to introduce you to the costume designer, and he just looks at her and just says, straight at bull face, he's like, who the fuck is this? So obviously she's been on a plane for so long, she's apprehensive because she thinks he's going to be an arsehole anyway, and he says that, and the producer jumps in, and she's kind of like, what's going on? The producer jumps in, he's like, no, Steven, listen, this is Katrina, she's amazing, I've worked with her on a bunch of movies, and Seagal's still looking at her, and the producer who's worked with Katrina says, I worked with her on Prozac Nation, which is a really awesome movie based on that really famous novel. We just did a movie called Tri-17 with Elijah Wood, and this was a time when Lord of the Rings was huge, so Elijah Wood was a massive star. And Seagal's just got this look on his face like he's chewing shit, and he's just like looking at her, and he's like, okay, so let me get this straight, lady. You make movies about hobbits that fuck kids on Prozac. And the room is just silent. And she's like, and John's like, no. And Seagal's like, okay. And he's like totally owning the room right now. And he's like, okay, whatever, Prozac, hobbits, I don't know what kind of crazy shit you do when you're by yourself. But listen, if you're going to be the costume designer, there's one thing you need to understand. We're in Asia. And you know the problem I have when I'm in Asia? And everyone's like, no, Stephen. He's like, it's finding pants that'll fit me because my dick is huge. Silence, complete silence. And everyone's like, oh my God, this is like fucking, nothing can go crazier right now. And then over in the corner of the room, one of his Thai assistants, this pretty like 20-year-old Thai girl who's tired because he's had her up all night, like not having sex with her, but like running around town trying to find him like the specific type of cedar toothpick that he likes to use. She's asleep in the corner of the room, and her head is leant back, and she's got her mouth open. You know when people fall asleep with their mouth open? And so the room is so crazy right now because he said this stuff. He's really abused this woman and everything. And he's like, do you want to see what I mean? And we're like, no one says anything. And he stands up, and he walks over to the Thai assistant, and he puts his hand down his trousers. And you know when you pull your fly down and you put your finger through the hole, like the dick's hanging out? He does that. And the Thai girl's asleep, and he puts his finger in her mouth. And she wakes up with Steven Seagal's finger in her mouth, like protruding through his fly. That's where the scene ends.
Fade to black.
Yeah, fade to black. And that's the God's honest truth. And that is one of them. Yeah.
So amazingly, James, you wound up working with Steven Seagal on yet a second movie. Was there ever a point where you were kind of like, oh, I can't do this again?
Well, when I was there, I was playing the game, and they offered me a chance to write another one. So obviously I took it because it was good money. And while we were making the first one, I wrote the second one, and I would have story meetings with him, and it all came to a head because of the second one. Like I never spoke to him again. And do you have time for one other story, Jay?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, because this is great. This is actually something that your listeners can go out and this is a really functional piece of information because, we had the second one was called Out of Reach. Yet again, it was a kidnap story, right? It was like whatever I tried to do with it, it was very much like there's a girl and she needs saving and I've got to save her. And I think by this point I was honest enough with him to say, listen, Stephen, like every single one of your movies for the last 5 years has been about you as a retired so-and-so, fill in the blank, CIA, Special Forces, whatever bullshit you've never done, right? And some damsel in distress who happens to be, from a third world country, gets kidnapped or gets whatever, and you have to go rescue her. Like, I think there's some stuff going on. I didn't like delve into the psychology of it, but I was like, listen, it's just not that interesting. Like, let's do something else. Like, let's make you a bad guy. I always wanted to make him a bad guy because I think it makes a great bad guy, Okay. But so he was like, no, it's got to be kidnapped, right? So it became this Romanian pen pal that he had. He was like this. He was a retired Special Forces guy who lived in like fucking Washington State, and he had a pen pal relationship with a 14-year-old Romanian girl, which is weird to start with, but whatever, we just did it, right?
I gotta go rent this one.
Oh, it's so good, and then, but it all came to the, and I want to take you. I guess I want to take you to like, this is like the Sheraton in Bangkok in the Seagal suite, and he had bedrooms and he had all this stuff, and we would always have our story meetings in the dining room. He had a separate dining room, and it was Seagal and myself, and we were talking about this scene where Seagal has finally made it to Romania. He's kind of like, he's used all of his kind of like contacts and his ability to track down who this girl is and what she's doing, and through his contacts, he's kind of like unpeeled back the layer of kind of corporate and political corruption, and he's been invited to an embassy like kind of gathering, like a cocktail party type thing. It just so happens, and he doesn't know this, that one of the kind of corrupt diplomats has her chained up in the cellar underneath this whole party, right? So I'm like, whatever, it's always good. Like, cocktail parties are always a good kind of good value movie-wise because you can have people dressed nicely and there's the string quartet and all that stuff. So I'm going along with it. And then he lays it on me. He's like, James, I have an idea. And I was like, okay. He's like, so I'm at the party and she's locked up in the cellar. She escapes from the cellar. She breaks into the kitchen. And there is a huge tray of hors d'oeuvres and amuse-bouches made up of pickles, gherkins, eggs, other things you may find at a cocktail party. She rearranges the entire plethora of food into a secret coded message that only I can understand. So when a waiter brings the platter up into the party, I see it and I know she is there. So obviously, with all the crazy stuff that I've dealt with, there are some major logic errors going on here. I'm like, okay, Stephen, A, how does she know you've arrived at the party, right? B, how does she know that the particular tray of hors d'oeuvres that she's arranging into a secret code are going to reach yourself before they're snaffled by the fat bastard waiting for all the hors d'oeuvres to come out? There's all these kind of things coming out, and he's just looking at me like I'm talking fucking Greek. You know what I mean? He's like, he can't understand how I don't think this isn't like as powerful as like the taxi driver. You know what I mean? He's like, he's just crazy with like confusion. And for the first time, I didn't bend. I was like, honestly, Stephen, like we can't do this. This is crazy. Like there's other ways to do this. Like if you want it to be some code in food, then we'll find another way to do it. And if you want an embassy party, that's fine. But like, this isn't going to work. Like, this is just... And I actually came out with it. I was like, this is stupid, Stephen.
Wait, true or false, James? You actually said to him, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard.
No, I didn't say... I said, this is stupid. This isn't going to work. This is going to make the movie worse. Like, we're going to... I didn't say this is dumb. So, I said, this is stupid. This isn't going to work. Like, we need to come up with something else. Like, this is just, this is just making a silly movie. We've got to shoot higher than this. Right? At that point, the veil of reality just came down on his face, and he just kind of, I could see, he kind of switched off, and he called off the meeting or something, and he was like, okay, I'll think about it. That was the last time I ever saw him. There were a couple of phone calls. Like, this was in the last week of like wrapping up the other movie. He kind of like phoned me. He used to phone me at like 4 a.m. and like be like, hey James, what's going on? And you'd be like, oh God, what's going on? He'd be like, just remember, I know what you faggots do at boarding school in England. And they'd hang up on me and crazy, like weird. It was weird. It wasn't gay advances. It was like just weird. You know what I mean? It wasn't, at no point did I ever think he was making gay passes. It was just, he just did weird shit like that. He phoned me up a couple of times being like, so what are you going to come and write my idea? Are you going to, this is a great idea. You're going to come and write this? And I'd be like, and I'd say to him, like, Stephen, I'm not doing the like the message in the food thing. Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, I'll come and work with you and make up something else, but like, I'm not doing it. So that didn't work, and I never heard from him again. Basically, I went back to England. I went back to LA. There was all this crazy stuff. They didn't want to pay me. Blah 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 blah. Like 2 years go by, or whatever it is. But I know in the back of my head, like I told the story I just told you guys, I've told to a number of people, but in the back of my head, I was like, wow, like I always wondered, I was like, what happened to that scene, So ultimately, Out of Reach comes out on DVD. I go to Blockbuster. I walk into Blockbuster on like La Brea or wherever it is in LA, and I go back to James Cox's house, the guy who I work with, who I told you, and I'm forwarding, and I try and watch the movie. Like, I get 10 minutes into the movie, and I'm just like, oh God, I can't even watch this. This is just crazy. So
you're like, who wrote this piece of shit?
Yeah, I'm forwarding through it, right? And I see what's going on, and I kind of know the story, so I'm like, okay, he's gone to he's in the forest. Okay, he's gone to Romania. So he's hooked up with the journalist. She's given information. I'm like going through like times 4 or times 8, you know. I'm like, he's met the journalist. Okay, and now he's into the police station. Oh, he beats people up in the police station. Oh, he's escaped the police station. Oh, car chase. Okay, hiding in the hotel. Oh, here comes the invite, and then it's suddenly like pan up on this huge kind of Art Deco Polish building, and there's a big kind of like diplomatic drape down the front. So I'm like, oh, fucking, that's the ticket. And I hit play, and we're into it. And as if on cue, the kind of the string quartet kicks in, and Big Fat Seagal is like in a tux, and he's like walking into this huge kind of like thing, and it's actually an interesting scene. There's like bad guys talking about him and stuff, and they kind of know who he is. It's kind of like budget James Bond. You know, when Bond walks into a casino and everyone knows who he is, but they don't do anything about it. It's like that kind of thing. And then suddenly they start cutting it with these other scenes of this 14-year-old Romanian girl who's like being held in the basement, and she escapes her captors and like runs into the kitchen. And I'm like looking at this, I'm like, holy Mausner, here we go, here comes the fucking hors d'oeuvres, here they come. And she finds this big platter, and you don't really see what she does, you know. So I was like, wow, I know what she just did. They didn't show you what she did because obviously they couldn't figure out how to make this idea work in any way. and then it cuts back to the party, and it's so classic. You all have to rent this movie and watch this moment. He's standing in the party, and a waiter brings this silver platter of what looks like sushi towards him, which is pretty weird in like an Eastern European diplomatic party. There's like maki rolls and California rolls. So they bring it to him, and he just looks down. And if you can imagine this, there's a kind of a tray, and it looks ridiculous. They've kind of spread away all the other food, and then in the middle of the tray is SOS in sushi. So imagine I'm being honest. Imagine kind of a cut maki roll that has, is it dash 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 dot 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 dash dash dash, or whichever one it is. I don't know which way around it is. Whether it's dot 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 dash dash, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's like dot dash dot or something, you know. And they've done it with the sushi roll by like leaving for the dashes in the Morse code. They've got the sushi roll like on its side. And for the dots, they've got it, you know. So they do dot, 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 slash, dash, 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 slash, dot, dot, dot. And then the voiceover with him in the voiceover, even if you know anything about Morse code, you know that it says SOS. They tried to compensate for it in the voiceover, which in his voice says, "Help me, I'm stuck," or something equally as ridiculous, where they tried to make it up in the ADR, where like he's going to understand from this fake sushi SOS message that she's in the basement. So it's just like, that to me, that's the best thing after everything, to see that the people who made the movie cared so little about the movie that they let that stay in there. It's just awesome. It's just a classic.
Well, I'm glad the scene stayed in, because I'd hate to think that you were fired in vain.
No, I know, it's amazing. And the best thing is that the ADR line where he says, you know, help me or whatever the ADR line is, it's not even his voice. And if you ever watch these movies, you should pay attention to all of the ADR dialogue, because they can never get him to, they can never persuade him to show up for the ADR stuff. So they have to hire this person who they think sounds a bit like him, but it's totally different. It's like 3 octaves higher than his actual voice. It's so funny. If he's in like a D and this person's in like a fucking B. I don't know what it is, but it's so funny. Watch the movie, even in Belly of the Beast. Watch it and listen to the dialogue when you're not seeing his mouth move, and it's a completely different person speaking because he can't be bothered to show up.
The ultimate irony would be if James Townsend winds up doing the voiceovers for Steven Seagal.
I wish it would be amazing. It'd be amazing.
James, that's a great story. Now, you had some success with Wonderland and the Seagal movies. What is it that, I know you had family and your wife and her family were back here. Is that what ultimately brought you back to New York?
No. Coming back to New York was just about not living in Los Angeles anymore. I'm still my writing's actually going very well. I've been hired to do a number of jobs recently, which I had to kind of reinvent myself because I was getting definitely pigeonholed into the kind of action beat 'em up DVD crazy world, because I did a number of jobs like that. So I think the only way to get away from that, because that really wasn't my life goal, as awesome as it was and as fun as all the fun I had to kind of leave it, stop doing it, moved back to New York, and kind of rethink about the kind of stuff I was working on, which I have done successfully. So I'm pretty psyched. But I wouldn't trade this stuff for the world. Like, if you said, "Hey James, do you wish you had made some fucking independent Larry Clark, Harmony Korine movie, or do you wish you'd made the Seagal movie?" I would take the Seagal movie any time, because I was the one on the G5 with the Bulgarian hitman and Seagal pointing guns at me and stuff. It's the most amazing stories of all time.
James, other than Wild Things 4, which I heard is currently in progress, can you tell us some of the other things that you've taken your name off? I think people get a kick out of that.
The best thing that myself and Captain Mauser used our pseudonyms for, and our pseudonyms being Monty Featherstone for myself and Howard Zensky for Mauser's pseudonym. Well, in fact, Captain Mauser already is a pseudonym for Josh Klausner, but he has a pseudo pseudonym of Howard Zensky, which is I don't know. It's a long story. We did a really amusing movie for the Sci-Fi Network. It was a TV movie called Hammerhead Shark's Frenzy, and it was one of those. It was like everyone's on an island and everyone's going to get killed and they've got to run away from the monster type movies. But the premise was that this billionaire kind of pharmaceutical mogul had a son who had cancer, and his company wouldn't support his crazy research to cure cancer. So he sold the company and moved to an island and continued on his own path of research. And he actually cured his son of cancer. The good news was his son was cured of cancer. The bad news was he'd used shark stem cell therapy, so his son was now half man, half shark. So in order to reap revenge on his kind of corporate situation, he invited all of the old people from the pharmaceutical company who hadn't seen him for 2 years to his tropical island for a tropical vacation. And he announced to them that they were going to have to fucking fight for their lives as his son hunted them down in half man, half shark form. Now, if this movie was being made for $150 million, it could probably work out quite well. Ben Affleck could be the Shark Boy, all that stuff. But unfortunately, they only had about $3 million, and they were shooting Bulgaria in January for a tropical island. So there are loads of very amusing kind of production moments in that movie. It's actually got William Forsythe in it. Remember William Forsythe? Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, he was a great actor. My American Me or whatever that shit was called, the James Elmos, whatever.
Well, don't forget the Steven Seagal movie he was in with him.
Oh, he was in one with him too.
Oh yeah, William Forsythe played the leader of a bad gang.
Right. Yeah, no, he's been in some good movies, but now, he was 240 pounds and kind of sitting in wherever he was sitting, and he got offered the job for how much, and he did it. My own. If anyone ever watches that movie on the Sci-Fi Network, my favorite moment is where they that one of the bad guys has an AK-47, and as you're pretty familiar with an AK-47, it has a very basic steel sight setup, like a pin with two pins at the back, and the bad guy brings the AK-47 to his shoulder and puts his cheek against the stock and kind of looks down the sights, right? And then it cuts to his view, and it's the stock image kind of telescopic crosshairs view. so they're basically you see the guy lift the AK-47 and you go to his view and it's kind of got crosshairs as if he's looking down the telescopic sight. It's a detail, but I love it.
Well, if anybody wants to go check out the trailer, you can actually type in Hammerhead or Shark Frenzy in IMDb, and the trailer for the film actually comes up. That was produced by, or actually who got Boaz Davidson, who's done a ton of stuff, got a credit for that. He also worked with you on Undisputed II, right?
Boaz is an amazing guy. He's an awesome kind of creative executive who works at this company, and they make loads and loads of just kind of product stuff like the sci-fi stuff, and then they make kind of like they really did well at making a lot of money and doing a lot of stuff with kind of fading stars, very much like the Seagal type mold. You know, they would get them when they were still famous overseas, but they weren't really famous here, so you could still. They made amazing money, and lots of people had a good time and made money and made fun movies. And they've actually moved into actually doing much better movies. They did 16 Blocks with Bruce Willis. They just did Brooklyn's Finest. Yeah, they do. It's an amazing company. They do like great kind of Bruce Willis movies, and also do like crazy kind of product movies like the Hammerhead stuff. So they really are a model. They're great. They're Israeli guys, and they have a lot of humor, and they're very dynamic, and they know how to work the movie business. That's for sure.
Well, of interest to one of our listeners in particular, Mr. Block, Boaz is actually doing the producing Conan, the new Conan that's coming out.
Yeah, I knew they were doing that. I kind of like, there was a moment where I could have made a bit of an angle or a little play to do that, but like, I don't know. It's got to be fun. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I don't know. The word on the inside is I don't think they've sorted out how to make it that great yet.
James, you heard a rumor that Arnold Schwarzenegger will be making a cameo?
I don't think he will. I don't think while he's in office he's still going to play that game. I don't think so. And they definitely don't have enough money to pay him to make a cameo. That's for sure. Well, they're definitely not going to risk it on Conan the remake. Yeah.
James, real quick on Undisputed II, which, like I said, if you go on the message boards for MMA and stuff, people just consider that movie legendary. I mean, people constantly quoting lines from that, talking about the great fight scenes in it. When you write a fight scene, do you just write kind of fight scene, or do you kind of get into the nitty gritty?
Well, specifically with that one, and I know I've kind of definitely made a lot of jokes, and I've kind of come at this in a very light-hearted way, being my style. But Undisputed II was a really awesome thing to be involved in, because I kind of sat down and I love prison movies, and I was like, I'm going to write like a fun, cool prison movie. And the director, Isaac Florentine, who's very into MMA, and his story is really interesting, but he's kind of Brazilian style. He kind of went to Israel and like landed in the desert and started like doing crazy MMA stuff in the desert with he's got a great story. He was very much like, you take care of the story, and he would talk to me about the dramatic dynamic of the fight. So I just mean like, okay, this is how these two fighters are going. And I love boxing. I love fighting. I love the story of it. So I would be involved in, okay, this is the way these two people are coming into this fight. This is generally the trajectory of the fight, okay? This person's on top, this person's down, this thing happens, this thing boom, 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 and this is how the fight ends, and that's how this particular fight fits into the overall narrative. Obviously, who punches who where and who kicks who where was completely him, I just kind of gave him a framework of like, this is generally the arc of the fight, and everything else was him. I wasn't really on set for the movie, so they really kind of evolved, and all of that crazy kind of fighting style, which really was awesome, was totally all him. That was his thing.
Were you on set, and did you get to hang out with Michael Jai White?
I wasn't on set for that. They went to Bulgaria, and I did everything from LA. So I would have liked to, but having the expense of an on-set writer isn't always possible with these smaller movies. I mean, that movie was great. It tested really well. It got very close to having a theatrical release. They were the numbers that it got with New Line, they were going to release it theatrically because it had a real following, as you've seen. But they already had the DVD deal in place, and if they wanted to release it theatrically, they would have had to pay out the DVD wing. There was actually kind of some kind of backroom kind of business stuff that went on. So no, I stand by that. I'm pleased I put my real name on that because it's kind of like I don't like the last scene. I didn't write the last scene. I didn't want to do the last scene with the kind of like the reunion with the girl and the guy the guy in the wheelchair and his granddaughter. Like, I thought that was just too schmaltzy. I was kind of pissed off they did that. But no, overall it's an awesome movie, and I'm pleased they did it.
Any chance of us hearing about you doing Undisputed III, which apparently is in pre-production?
Well, I don't know. I had a little bit of email contact with them, with the director, and I don't know how far along they are with. It's like all these things. I don't think they have a screenplay for it yet. But you'll be the first to know, Jay. I don't know. I don't know if I would do it. It depends. It would have to be with the same guy, and it would have to be kind of. Yeah, I don't know. I'll let you know. Watch this space. I'll let you know. You'll be the first to know.
You know, I think we just overlooked that one story where Steven Seagal made you call him a genius.
Well, that was kind of looped in with the stories when he would phone me at 4:00 in the morning, and and just to get rid of him, basically, I would agree to call him a genius, and then the conversation could end. But I mean, that kind of existed in many forms.
He would actually
hold on. Oh, I have one last great visual for you. Okay, Jay?
Okay, go ahead.
The producers who wanted him to lose weight basically enforced upon him a treadmill, like a running machine.
Right.
So, and he was really pissed off about this. He was very hurt that they had insinuated that he was overweight, like doing a treadmill, even though he was like 328 pounds or whatever he was. And they moved, and they had people from the hotel move a treadmill into his kind of presidential suite, right? and the next day, I turned up with the producer, and he said to us, he said to the producer, he's like, "Hey, John, I've been using the treadmill." And John was like, "Oh, that's great. That's really cool. I'm pleased to see you've kind of, you've taken responsibility for the movie. I think it'll be better." And he's like, "No, I don't mean that." And he like claps his hands, and in the other room, the treadmill starts, and he has like a Thai girl that he's hired to run on the treadmill for him. That's the humor I'm talking about. So for all of the crazy stuff, I want everyone to know that he has a very interesting sense of humor that never failed to amuse me.
I have a feeling that our listeners will never look at Steven Seagal the same way again after hearing all these stories. James, I said, James happens to be one of the funniest storytellers you'll ever hear, and I'm glad you lived up to your billing.
Thank you, Jay. Fantastic.
James, I will catch up with you soon. Thanks for spending the evening with us, and my love to Jenny and Lily.
Absolutely.
All right?
Good evening.
Thanks, brother. Bye-bye. Block?
I'm here.
Did you enjoy that?
I did. Very funny. I did enjoy it. Especially
what's great? You very rarely get that kind of glimpse into just everything, into like going over, an action hero's house and going on a plane with them and just hearing these stories, because usually everybody has to sign a confidentiality agreement. If they come out and they tell you a story, they wind up getting sued. So everybody just kind of keeps their mouth shut. So you hear a lot of stories on the sets, like the story about Stallone, where he was mic'd up, but he forgot to turn his mic off when they shut down his scene. So he was still mic'd, and all the tech guys still have their headphones on, so they can hear everything he says, and they hear him like, going back to his trailer and stuff, and then they hear a girl, and they hear him, start to get down with like an intern who was working on the, PA on the film set, and then they hear him like, he's like, oh yeah, cradle the balls. And it became known as the cradle the balls story, that Sly likes his balls to be cradled. Not shaken, not stirred. So, if you go on to, any set, everybody, knows, the Sly Stallone Cradle the Balls story. They know, other stories that are just, word-of-mouth stories, because nobody apparently can print them without fear of getting sued.
This sounds like a Steven Seagal movie, Cradle the Balls.
I think that's coming in 2009. The hand that rocks. The hand that rocks the cradle of the balls.
The hand that cradles the balls. Rebecca De Mornay.
Oh, yeah, we missed her on our list of hot 80s girls.
Oh, yeah, especially in Risky Business, man. It doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, you definitely, you know, when you look at Rebecca De Mornay, I don't think it's coincidental that she kind of bears a lot of facial resemblance to Tracy Lords.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. From Crybaby, the porn star. Yeah, I never really thought about that. I really like the strawberry blonde hair and the fierce blue eyes. Yeah, probably. I see it.
Yeah, and, you know, and when I look at like Risky Business, I look at her, and, you know, you ever just look at a girl and you get a sense, you don't know, it's like a sixth sense you have, and you think, wow, she would be really, like, turned out real quick in the porn industry. Yeah. Right. Sometimes you just see a girl and you think, like, wow, they would just turn her out really fast. Yeah. She had that sex appeal, Rebecca De Mornay. I used to feel the same way about Laura Dern. I think after I seen the movie Wild at Heart with Nicolas Cage. Do you remember that movie? Yeah. You know, I agree. You know what it is? It's like they're hot, but there's something like a little off, and you kind of sense that there's something a little off in their head too. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, Wild at Heart was one of my like favorite movies as a kid. Like to me, when that movie came out, that was like a porn to me. Well, did you see Wild Things with Denise Richards and? Yeah. I did Matt Dillon and who was that? Neve Campbell. Right. And the funny thing is, they made Wild Things when, like, I guess the two of them, you would have to say, were at their peak. Not that Neve Campbell ever did anything amazing, but I think that was when Party of Five had just, like, left the air, so that was, like, one of the big movies coming off Party of Five. And Denise Richards, I guess, was hot at the time. I don't know if she was a Bond girl right around before or after that movie. But yeah, when that movie came out, they were really hot, and then they couldn't get either one of them to do the remake. So I actually suggested, because Mausner and Townsend are writing Wild Things 4 right now for a payday, for a paycheck, and I said, you know, I would give serious consideration to calling Denise Richards and Neve Campbell. I can't imagine that movie is any longer beneath them. Like, what else are they doing? You know what I mean? Yeah, seriously. When was the last time you saw Neve Campbell? Last time I seen her was, I don't know, like Studio 54. Right. She could easily, the Scream movies. She could easily be up there in the Steven Seagal stratosphere of weight. Yeah. She definitely pushed the maximum density. Absolutely. She definitely had that Porky tendency. Porky, and Denise brings me back to the mid '80s. You remember the Porky movies? You know what I remember about Porky's was Kim Cattrall, who went on to great fame in Sex and the City, played Lassie. And I tell you, man, when I saw that movie for the first time, that was like one of my first like rated R movies I saw, and I was just like, that is the hottest girl ever. Yeah, Kim Cattrall. To this day, every time I see the movie Mannequin on HBO, I can't seem to turn the channel. What a fox! Yeah, she's really hot, and she was in the first Police Academy. You know, but her being in Porky's and screaming and moaning like that, I consider Porky's a gateway to porn because of that scene. Yeah, that's pretty close. Yeah, to me, when I was like, 6, when those movies were famous, 7, 8, you know, I have clear memories of like laying on my mom's couch at like 2 in the morning with the remote in my hand, praying. It's just like walking to the living room, watching Porky's with the volume on like 1. Yeah, and then you realize that good times, man. You realized it wasn't a remote, and those buttons you were pressing. Yeah. Those are your buttons. Those are my buttons. She was pressing my buttons, let me tell you. Yeah, but that was fun. That was fun. I had a lot of laughs. James just cracks me up every time I talk to the guy, and he's always got some funny story. But I heard a couple tonight. I never heard any of those stories about him getting on the G5 Gulfstream or going over Seagal's house for the first time. So you know, people think it would be boring to have people that I know on the show, but I'm always learning something new. That's true. Yeah, it was fun. It was a good story. I'll never look at Steven Seagal the same way. Definitely not. And you know, next hear some more Kelly LeBrock stories, because you know how I feel about Kelly LeBrock. I know, but I didn't think he had any. I didn't want him to, you know, if it was any stories, that was long after they were together, so I figured they would probably be more like divorce stories anyway. But next week I am psyched because we got Evolve from Style Life. If you go to stylelife.com, you want to check that out. Also, if you're interested in any of the movies we heard about tonight, Wonderland, Belly the Beast, or Out of Reach, I've made all three available. You can just click on the link below the show and pick up any of them from Amazon.com. I think they're like in the $10 to $15 range. But like I said, you'll never watch those movies the same again. I want to thank our guest, James Townsend, and, of course, U-Block. We will catch up with you next week, same bat time, same bat place. And everybody out there, the Big Nation, thanks for listening.
You're listening to KVIG, Big Nation Radio.